Guruji asked you to speak about spirituality in the science world or about science in the spiritual world.
Told me to speak about God in the scientific field in a language they can understand.
How's that been?
That's been an interesting journey. Two particles are entangled. If you know the state of one, you know the state of the other, even if the other particle is light years away.
From a spiritual perspective, quantum entanglement seems to be the most attractive idea. Someone who is of a higher state of realization or state of consciousness, however you want to term it, like Guruji, is able to not only know what is going on in the life of someone who is, 1,000 miles away, but affect it.
The rishis and sages who have that divine vision inside of them have seen it and written it down. There's 18 different Puranas, all 18 of them independently sort of are describing this cosmology.
If scientists would be more open to, as we said earlier, dialogue, converse, not fight, not debate, not whatever, but just sort of explore. I want to know everything you have to teach me about this world. And yet here are some undeniable displays of something that you can't explain.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's sit down and have a conversation without preconceived notions and judgments. How far away do you think that is from being a reality? Jai Gurudev Madhava.
Jai Gurudev Swami Revatikaanta.
It's very nice to have you here today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Last night I was talking to Guruji that this podcast would be filmed, and he was very positive about it. He was encouraging about it. And I think it's from that point that I want to kick off this conversation. He has encouraged you, as far as I understand, to propagate, to speak about your experiences in the spiritual world as well as in the scientific world. And let's give context to that, background to that. How have you become the person you are right now? What's been the journey to get here, and what's your background?
Yeah, so my spiritual name is Madhava, but my worldly name is, so I have Nishant Bhatt. And I currently work at the CERN on antimatter physics. So my background and my expertise, my PhD degree, and so on and so forth, are in quantum, atomic, and molecular optics. So I'm a specialist in understanding the basics of quantum physics, and also I work with lasers and atoms and molecules to understand the fundamental reality and probe the fundamental nature of reality through experiments. So at CERN right now, I work in antimatter experiments where we create antihydrogen and use lasers to probe its fundamental properties and investigate how antimatter is different from matter, and to basically shed some more light on theories that go beyond our current understanding of physics and that can hopefully describe how our universe was created. Yeah. Because right now, our current theory of physics doesn't describe the beginning of the universe so well. So that's what I'm working on right now, and in a nutshell. And and I'm also a devotee of Paramahamsa Vishwananda, very proudly and very happily. And of course, I'm also married, and I have a 7-month-old daughter, very sweet. And so that's sort of my background.
A sort of quick fact file, right?
Yeah.
How did you essentially get to that point of becoming a devotee? I mean, I assume as I know from our own conversations, that science, physics was a passion of yours as a young child. So how does that journey evolve into your studies, your eventual profession, but then the marriage with the spiritual side of your life? How did that come about?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story actually, because I was always kind of a hard feeling person. Like I followed my heart, and which kind of led me into physics. I'm like, I feel that this is going to be my subject matter to study further. And after I joined physics, and as I was pursuing my master's in atomic physics at the time, experimental atomic physics, and I felt like I have everything, that I've checked everything on my to-do list. I've done everything that I thought would make me happy and fully satisfied. Yet I'm not fully satisfied. There's something. This don't have the full satisfaction. There's this. So what's next? And all of my atheistic theories and agnostic theories were kind of not convincing my heart at all. It was paining my heart, actually. Like every time I told myself something like this, it was just like, this doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. And at some point, I'm just like, you know what? There's a need for God. I can observe my mind, I can observe things, but I'm not full. I need God somehow. So I chanted the only mantra I knew at the time, which was the Gayatri mantra. And the moment I chanted and prayed sincerely, I need God. I need to know where to go now. I felt so much joy in my heart. I felt like a part of my heart was open, you know. And I started to explore a little bit more, and I started to go into reading about the books of saints, because of course you have God and you have the saints. One of the saints was called Swami Shivananda. He was a medical doctor, and whose life transformed as he practiced the Eightfold Steps of yoga, and eventually got to a point where he was to a level of deep spiritual realization, where he could speak about both the realities, the spiritual and the material. So he could talk about medicine, he could talk about atoms and molecules and how things are. And these realities do exist. They can be described by this language, but there's a fundamental reality inside where you can explore and realize the spiritual self, realize God inside of you, and realize that relationship with God even. And depending on who you are, you can realize the all-pervasive nature of God, or you can realize the sweetness of the relationship with God. And that really spoke to me. And when I looked at the experiences that his disciples had with him, I was like, this is so touching. You know, this is so deeply touching of how the divine cares for you, you know? Mm-hmm. And that was my gateway. It's like, this is something really profound and something that really speaks to me. And so I decided, okay, let's carry on further. Okay, and I continued my investigation. I read this amazing book called The Autobiography of a Yogi, which then opened even more channels. I started to understand the sweetness of the relationship that one can have with a spiritual master, a guru, who has fully experienced the divine. And his only goal is for you to have the same. He has had that full satisfaction of knowing the love of God, knowing, having the divine experience. And he has everything he wants. There's nothing he wants, but all he cares is for you to have that same experience. And that sweetness of their relationship when the disciple finds the guru, and when they start to experience the transcendental, have their heart open more and more through the practice of spirituality, and more they start to discover the divine, you know, which is sort of a mystery in this world. But when you go deeper inside, and you can discover it, just like how Guruji says, you know, how you can go inside and discover the mystery of God, and he has given all these tools and guidance to go inside. So that was the point. And so you go from there, and I'm like, okay, I need a guru, because I'm practicing things. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm not convinced, like my mind is still there. I need knowledge. I need care, guidance to go to a spiritual reality, which I don't know nothing about, right? It's not something you can write out on a piece of paper as an equation. It doesn't exist. Right. It's an internal journey, right? So then I was praying to Mahavatar Babaji one day, like, you know, it's just basically in the Autobiography of a Yogi. He's the guru of the guru, and he's known as Mahavatar Babaji. He's a yogi who lives in the Himalayas. He's quite, and basically, okay, it's a divine figure. Okay, so I prayed to him deeply, and I said, well, only you can help me find my path, because I don't know what to do. I don't know where I'm going to find a living master. I live in Toronto, in Canada, in the middle of a hustling, bustling city. I go to University of Toronto to do my studies. Am I supposed to go to the Himalayas? I'm still studying, you know. I don't have enough money to go there and all this, you know. Okay, so I just prayed. And then one day, you know, I keep walking down the street of my university. Every day for 8 years, I've been walking down that street, because I did my undergraduate in the university, and now I'm doing my master's in the university, and I worked near the university later on and all this. So But one day I'm like, I need to look at these advertisements on the university campus, on this signboard or the lamppost. I've never looked at them, but today I want to look at them. So I go to the lamppost and I go look at the advertisement. I'm like, that's curious. It's the picture of a flower and really, cheesy word art format that says bhaktimarga.org. I'm like, what is that? So I open my phone, I go to bhaktimarga.org and I see Guruji's photo. I'm like, okay, what do? I should scroll down at the bottom of the page. Then I see Atma Kriya Yoga. I click on that and I see Kriya Yoga that was spoken in the autobiography of Yogi, Mahavatar Babaji's picture and Guruji's photo. I'm like, and this is the path of meditation that I've been looking for so long. I'm like, okay, let's get to it. I contact the teacher, meet with the teacher. I hear about the sweetness of the relationship with the Guru that she has. Now I know a person, actually, an actual person who is living that reality. I'm like, okay, so I can have access to such a reality. So let me find out more, Mm-hmm. So, okay, then I felt like, but now I need to actually see if he's my spiritual master, if he's my guru or not. And, and I'm like, okay, so now what do I do? But more and more as I keep going deeper, I start to realize that, wow, I really connect with him. I have various dreams with him and I wake up in a super blissful state, like super happy state. And I'm like, okay, you know what? One day I decided I got to go to Germany. I got to go to SPN, Friedrichshain here, 1 hour from Frankfurt to find out more from him. To ask him, just to experience, just to see what he has. And I came to attend the Bhagavad Gita course, which was a 16-day, not 16-day, I think it was an 8-day course. It was a shorter one in 2016.
Right, it was the second one then, yeah. I think it was around, 8 days, something like
8 days, yeah. 8-day Bhagavad Gita course and also the darshan. So I went to see him and then basically I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a darshan with a fully realized spiritual master who has had the full experience of God. Now what's going to happen? So I go to the darshan and he gives me a blessing. I look into his eyes as per the darshan. And I'm like, many people had many amazing experiences at the darshan. I'm like, if I have an experience, maybe it confirms my belief that he's my guru, But I had no experience. I'm just like, oh, nice. I feel good. Hello, how are you? Where are you from? From Canada. Nice. Good. Here's the candy, chocolate. Off you go. Okay, good. I sit down. I'm like, okay, nothing happened. I was just like, nothing happened. I don't know who's my guru. I don't know where I'm going to find him. I'm at the edge of a cliff. I don't know what to do. And, how did I come here? All these things. So my mind was going crazy. And then I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just go to my room and cry because I don't know what to do anymore to find my spiritual path. And as I was about to get up, he stops me. He's like, hey, you. Guy with glasses. There's about 500 people in the room. Remember this, okay? But he just stops wherever he's doing. As I was about to get up, he just looks and he says, "Hey, you, the guy with glasses. Call him here." And it's like, so somebody calls me. Guruji's calling you. Okay, go up. I'm like, whoa! I was just about to get up and leave, and he called me. And then I start to serve him. He tells me to give him the flower petal and the chocolate and the vibhuti or the holy ash that he's giving to everybody. So I gather them up and I give it to him. So he gives it to the people after blessing them and talking to them. So I was just giving him. And it was convincing enough for me. Like, okay, all right, there's something more here. And I'm good. I'm in good hands. He knows. Okay, fine. He knows what I'm going through, I guess. And then the next day, one thing that happened was that I felt profound love for the worship and the rituals and all these things that were happening. And at the end of the day, there was a satsang with Guruji, which is like a Q&A session with him, and it was a small group of people. And as I was going through the satsang, I was in a very calm state because I was sitting near to him, and I was just sitting near to him, right next to where he is. I'm just sitting there, and I'm going through this, listening to him, and this idea suddenly popped into my mind that, you know what, he's my spiritual master, and I feel that whatever I'm looking for, I'll find it with him. I find it with what he's giving and what he's teaching. And I just felt so deeply peaceful and so deeply loved at that moment that I'm home, you know? So after that, I just started to explore this path much more. I'm like, yes, okay, he is my spiritual master. And he confirmed it again later on. And of course, we've been talking, and I've had many, many experiences with him afterwards. And I kind of live the reality of Bhakti, which is the path of love and devotion. And more I feel the awareness of God increasing in my life over time, you know, the 8 years that I've been with him now. So, yeah, that's...
And the feeling of fulfillment?
Feeling of fulfillment, 100%, you know, like, what fulfillment? Like, of course, this is the life of devotee, you know, it's the most precious life I have is
Amazing.
To be a devotee.
No, it's, I think two things. First, it can seem rather mundane, what you just shared about, you know, Guruji saw you, or Guruji interrupted you about to get up and leave. But actually, if you think about it, and I had these kind of experiences, I've seen this kind of thing. You go for a darshan, you have your own internal process afterwards where you're about to get up and leave and say, you're about to go cry because this was not what I was hoping for or expecting or whatever it may be. And he's already moved on. He's doing other things. He's blessing other people. He's in another space. And in this crowd of 500 people, he interrupts whatever he's doing to call you out and say, no, like at the moment you're about to leave, to rather come back, right? And I think these things, sometimes people go like, oh, but why did that convince you? Because it's the marriage of all these millions of details that come together at the same time almost to be like, look, it's you put almost like a challenge forward to reality. It's like, this is my guru or it's not. Mm-hmm. And I come here and it's not, and I'm about to leave now. Like, and then that reality says, no, actually, here is your confirmation in some sense. And I feel like these experiences they're so frequent at with people who are around Guruji. Yeah. It's like, I have often made this point to people. You don't understand Guruji through YouTube. You don't understand Guruji by watching him from afar. You will start to understand him when you start to live what it is to be around him, when you start to hear these kind of experiences, and when you start to have them for yourself, when you start to see that whole sort of network of divine coincidences that happen consistently across the board, people with all different types of necessities, backgrounds, whatever it may be. And that's what really starts to, in my opinion, create this, not this attraction. I think attraction sometimes is too weak a word. It's like this feeling that is unshakable. It's an unshakable feeling of, I'm home, as you said. Yeah. This is something that goes far beyond just convenience or whatever it may be. It's like, this really is a deeper resonation here. Like it really, really, really resonates. Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry to sort of go on a tangent there, but great. I think that's sort of your entry point into your relationship with Guruji then. Yeah. You already had your scientific background at that point. Yeah. Right.
I was already doing my master's and I was already starting my PhD actually. Yeah.
Right. And so what did Guruji, when you told Guruji, I'm assuming the conversation eventually ensued and you told Guruji what your life profession was and all of this. What was his response to it? What was his sort of interaction with you about that?
Yeah, it was interesting actually. It was like, I was kind of inside of myself thinking like, okay, what is my dharma now? Do I continue physics or do I just become a monk?
Everybody has that thought at least once.
Everybody has that thought at least once for sure. Yeah. And so I was, okay, great. So let's explore this a bit. And I was like, okay, I don't know. Maybe he can answer my question. And so he was walking one day and he saw me as like, hey, how are you? I'm good. And like, so what do you do? I'm like, I'm studying. What are you studying? Oh, I'm doing my master's in physics. And he's like, oh, physics. He just walks away. I'm like, okay, that's amazing. That's awesome. Okay. And then one day I was in the Bhagavad Gita course and I was really exploring, I was really into the course, and he was saying how one can raise oneself in their consciousness to sort of become an instrument of the divine, where you're letting his love and his perfection and his divine qualities shine through you. And which brings such a big benefit to the world and big upliftment for this world. And I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I want. This is exactly what I want. Please let me be your instrument. I was just telling myself this over and over again. And then again, he stops his discourse. He stops his discourse and he's like, okay, yes, now you. He calls me up and he's like, give him the mic. Now, Mr. Scientist, go tell everyone what's the relationship between mass and energy. I'm like, mass and energy is Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. Mass is energy, energy is mass. They both have the same influence on the gravitational field. Voila. And I said something like that. And he's like, yeah. And you see in the Bhagavad Gita, which is written 5,000 years ago, and it already describes that how everything is energy. Mr. Scientist. And he asked me to sit down, like not in a mocking way, but he's like, Mr. Scientist, like he's kind of encouraging that idea. And like, okay, I sit down. But of course, then he goes on to describe in the Bhagavad Gita how one should appreciate wherever God has put one, and one should carry on doing that work with full devotion, because there's no accident where you are. So I'm like, I am right now doing my master's. I am doing my PhD. So I should continue doing what I'm doing and carry on with what I'm doing. And I think, and if it has to be different, it will be different. I will have signs that it has to be different. But right now, there's no sign that it has to be different. There's nothing that tells me that I should be doing anything else. So I just go back and convinced that, okay, Guruji asked me to speak in front of a lot of people, and, it would be it doesn't feel right to just negate that path, and do something else, And I was convinced in myself, if it has to be different, it'll be different. God, Guruji will guide me. It's all fine. Let's carry on doing physics. And so that's how I continued doing physics. And
eventually there was more encouragement from his side. There were further conversations.
Continuously, always, whenever we met in person, whether it was over a lunch or whether it be in darshan or whatever it is, he kept asking, how is your scientist thing going? And he was very, very much interested in hearing what I had to say. And even once I was doing my postdoc here in Germany, on atomic clocks, and he's even asking me and taking the time to understand how an atomic clock works. It's so sweet from him. He's like thousands of people,
sure.
Yet he's listening to me describing why I'm working on atomic clocks and how I can use atomic clocks to for various purposes that is good for this world somehow.
Right.
So he's always encouraged, and he's always encouraged me to keep going.
It's something that's been on my mind for a long while. There's a verse in the Isha Upanishad that speaks about that in order to attain full realization, one needs to actually obtain knowledge of both realities, the spiritual and the material. And my fascination with this has always been, to what extent does the knowledge of the material play a role in this? Like, to what level do we have to have an understanding of this? Because the verse seems to allude only one who knows the science of spirituality and the science of matter. To such a person, the mysteries of reality will be revealed somehow, something like this. I can't remember the exact quoting of the verse. There's different translations for it. And a lot of people that I know of take the material sciences to mean more the workings of our material self, so to speak. So almost like the humanities and social sciences and like understanding psychology and this kind of realm. They take it more in that level. So it's like we need to understand ourselves as spiritual beings, and we need to understand ourselves as material beings, and then understand how you function materially, and that will be a gateway to eventually understanding how you function spiritually, right? It's fine. It's one theory, and I think it's definitely tenable. I think the issue is that, what if the verse meant more than that? What if the verse was, understand how all of this works materially, and then that will be a gateway to how you understand how everything works spiritually, not just yourself, right? And so I'm kind of not surprised, and at the same time encouraged that Guruji is encouraging of yourself and scientific pursuits in general. My conversation with him last night seemed to allude to that again, where he was like, oh, that's really great that you guys are going to talk about this. And I think there is a lot in the religious world. I mean, I navigate these waters a lot in the religious world of what is the role of science, what is not the role of science. Often I find small minds in the religious world tend to denigrate science as if somehow science is the enemy, which I find to be problematic. I do believe that the mentality exists on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, for sure.
Religion is the enemy in some sense, in the reverse sense. And I'm far more interested in exploring the commonalities, and I'm far more interested in exploring how the two can help each other out almost. Because I think reality is far more complex than most people would ever dream to think of, right? And I think we're going to unpack a little bit of that. And I think there is a lot of collaboration possible between the two realms if you want to separate them so cleanly. Let's put it like this, the scientific and the Vedic. But let's not sort of jump ahead too much. You mentioned that your area of expertise or area of focus, would you want to dive in a little bit more into that? And I think I would invite you, if possible, to touch upon the idea of the quantum. The reason being, as you know and I know, a lot of people, especially in New Age spiritual movements, quantum mechanics, quantum fields, quantum in general is often invoked as this sort of catch-all mystical word, where it's like, if something starts to be a little bit like spiritual, quantum. Yeah, quantum is just chucked out there. What's your sort of, let's say, understanding of the whole situation? How would you characterize this?
Yeah, it's I understand. Okay, I understand the layman point of view who are not well versed in the quantum physics, or not well versed in the interpretations of quantum mechanics, perhaps, or not well versed in all aspects of the theory, because it takes time to master it, and its parameters are very rigidly defined by its mathematics, and it's not so easy to, and it's easy to just pull things from there and try to really be enthusiastic about it and say, hey, my spiritual experience, sort of like what with spirituality and quantum is just like, it can be married, and it's amazing, it's good. But also what tends to happen is that you start to put off a lot of the scientists in that language, because it's like you're not really being truthful to the science, right? And science is a noble pursuit of knowledge. Like you empirically test everything, and it's a very valid and very thorough approach of things. But in spirituality, it's the realm of going inside and realm of having the personal experience, and that personal experience also cannot be denied, right? And when you try to marry them in a very superficial way, you start to lose appreciation. And both sides can lose appreciation of the things, right? But if you want to look at quantum theory, and let's put it in a perspective, what it's saying, what quantum theory mechanics is saying, is that it was the theory that was developed to be able to answer some of the experimental conundrums that were happening in the early 20th century. And this theory was brought by Erwin Schrödinger, Werner Heisenberg, and other people, including Albert Einstein, who brought a part of the theory using the photoelectric effect. And basically, how light is made up of quanta was the beginning of that theory. And so if light is made up of quanta, then a good way to describe things would be in a probabilistic way, which is using the Schrödinger equation. And you can describe a particle having a wave-like nature and a particle-like nature is both satisfied by the Schrödinger equation, where particle exists as a wave of probability, having position and momentum as the probability of having a certain position, and probability amplitude of having a position and momentum. And it's described by something called complex numbers, which is not 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's a different set of numbers that have they are called complex numbers. And this type of an equation, or how the cyst quantum state evolves in time, is described by the Schrödinger equation. And upon a measurement on the quantum system, you can collapse this probability behavior into a very classical notion of this particle has this momentum and this position. That's the basis of quantum theory. That's kind of even an axiomatic approach of quantum theory. It has this into it, right? So this is one thing.
Yeah.
So because of that, it's like there's an indeterministic nature of the particle's position and momentum. And whether this indeterministic nature is fundamental, like this, so nature is random. An atheistic argument will take that as like nature is random, see? And when we probe it, we are able to probe it. So therefore, everything has come out of randomness. Mm-hmm. So that's the strength of that argument. But every time we are brought in randomness, also in theory, we have always understood that it's also a level of ignorance that we have about the system. So you look at fields like just when you look at many other fields of physics, like thermodynamics and all this, the randomness is basically our inherent understanding, and emergent properties of thermodynamics seem to describe classically what's going on, right? So you can say the temperature of water, the pressure of air, and all these things are properties because of many particles coming together. And you can talk about this collectively without talking about each individual particle at a time, right? So that's sort of the idea. And so you can talk about emergent properties from randomness, but that just means that you don't know what each particle is doing. And you don't need to know in order for our daily world to function. In the same way, what physicists have done with quantum mechanics is that, okay, there's the inherent randomness, which means that we don't know, is undeterministic. So let's take that, and yet we are able to calculate the levels of hydrogen atom, for example, the levels of the behavior of and the structure of atoms and molecules in such an incredible way. And it seems to fully satisfy all the experimental conundrums that were appearing in that early 19th century and beyond. So it was such a successful theory. And when you marry it with special relativity, you now start to see something called quantum field theory. And in fact, you go even one level deeper. It's like you have the quantum field theory can be described as mathematical representations in space-time somehow. And so this quantum field theory now describes the interaction of very fundamental particles like electrons and quarks and gluons and quarks and all these things, and how they interact with each other by force mediators that describe the gluons or photons and other things. So our reality, as we see it, is basically, you can see this glass is made up of atoms, but it's mostly empty space. And the reason why my hand can't go through this glass is simply because of electromagnetic repulsion, as a perspective of things, right? So it's so what I'm trying to get at is basically that this quantum reality is indeterministic, but the theory is very successful in describing the physical reality. So you can calculate many properties of electrons using quantum field theory to such a high precision. Like you can calculate it in 9 decimal places using quantum electrodynamics and Feynman diagrams. I'm throwing words out there for the people who know what they are, what these things are. And you can actually come to a number. And then when you test it using theories, when you test these theories in experiments, which have been developed over many, many decades, you start to come to the same number, almost to 9 decimal places of accuracy. Very reliable, very precise. And it almost seems to think that this mathematical description of the universe is is really a mystery. It's such a how this deep, complex mathematics, and this, of course, this beautiful mathematics also, I would say, seems to describe our reality, our observed reality so far, in such a wonderful way, right? Mm-hmm. So now that's the extent of it.
Yeah.
But the indeterminism in quantum mechanics has never been addressed.
Well, I want to touch on that actually, because I think for the layman, the indeterminism is what tends to attract people on both sides. So as you're saying, the scientists will take that and say, this is proof that the world is random. There is no design per se. The spiritual person, the religious person, often also takes the indeterministic qualities of quantum field theory or something like this, and they will say, but you see, this is also the proof that it's not bound by scientific or mathematical rules. right? They'll take the reverse approach using the same principle to prove, you see, your scientific method cannot fully understand, it can only predict. Now, I think that most people who are uneducated will assume that the ability for science and maths to predict things is lower than it actually is, right? They'll say, but the quantum means that you don't really understand what's going on, right? It's all just probability. It's not facts. It's not a certainty. It's probability. I don't think it's ever as let's say, incomprehensible as most people would wish it to be on the religious side of things. But nonetheless, I think it's interesting to know that this indeterminism seems to be the catch point on both sides of the argument. Right? But you were going to say something about indeterminism that hasn't been addressed by science. Is there something you wanted to say? Anything else about that, or?
No, I think that's one thing. But the other thing is also just to add more fuel to the fire.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's chuck it all in.
Chuck it all in. There's also the idea of entanglement, right? The quantum entanglement.
Right.
This has been clearly shown by experimental evidences. Like the Nobel Prize was awarded recently to show that this is entanglement and faster than light, sort of collapse of the wave function. And then you know this. So the idea is entanglement, that if two particles are entangled, if you know the state of one, you know the state of the other. You make a measurement on one, you interact and disturb the system, one of the particles, but you automatically know the state of the other particle, even if the other particle is light years away.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be a mathematical absurdity that Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen proposed to say that quantum theory is incomplete. But because this has been proven experimentally, this seems to be a feature of quantum mechanics. And now it's been used for quantum computation. Now it's used for quantum teleportation, quantum communication. And later on, all these technologies will be developed, and they're because of this inherent property, right?
How was this experimented? Like, how was this tested? The idea of entanglement.
It's difficult to describe. Basically, it says that in a very specific way. I believe it was the interferometer experiment. So you have a really large interferometer, and where you have entangled particles you send through. I'm not so sure how it was tested to be specific. I don't know the exact specifics of it, but there's a specific theoretical inequality that was said that if the system is entangled, it will violate this inequality. If the Bell's inequality was the first version of it, then there's another one by CHCZ, I think. Sorry if I'm getting this wrong.
Doesn't matter.
That's inequality. And it was shown to be violated, which means that the system can only be described in an entangled way. So it's showing quantum entanglement is real, which means, and it is an implication, that local realism is false, i.e. the fact that things have to be locally interacting for you to understand their state or to understand a measurement is false.
Their relationship,
can be far away.
Even?
Yeah, the relationship is not local.
Right.
The particle can be super far away,
I have to say, I'm going to point out the obvious. From a spiritual perspective, quantum entanglement seems to be the most attractive idea, because a lot of what we believe on a theistic level as well is dependent on entanglement, because the idea, for example, that we're all interconnected, inherently so. The idea that someone who is of a higher state of realization or a state of consciousness, however you want to term it, like Guruji, is able to not only know what is going on in the life of someone who is 1,000 miles away, but affect it, do something with it, like as if he is entangled with all of his devotees, in some sense. I say it in a sense of like jest, but at the same time, it's very true. We all have experiences that point towards this, and someone might say, well, if there is a scientific explanation for it, it would negate his divinity. I see it as the opposite. I see it as a way of explaining why he is capable of doing that, and perhaps others not so. It's not that the entanglement doesn't exist with others too. I believe everything is in a sense entangled. This is my actual faith-based belief, I would say. But that doesn't mean that everybody can act upon said entanglement consciously, that we can actively affect a change on said object with which we are entangled somewhere else by design, by will, by whatever it may be, right? And I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff and ideas and whatever it may be that will be developed in that area. But I think entanglement for me is definitely what is most attractive from what I have been exposed to in the field of quantum in general, with the spiritual principles that I also sort of study and teach and whatever.
Yeah. Actually, you could go a bit further to see that entanglement is not changing the state, perhaps. It doesn't make a change at a distance, even though, but by pinning down one, you're pinning down the other.
Yeah.
The exact mechanism, if it's just probably
sure, not changing. I agree with you, but I'm saying that if there would be a divine creator to this, that divine power would be able to use those, in a sense, those pathways between said objects to affect some kind of change. Not that the random, person could.
No, agreed. I mean, you know what? Like our conscious experiences with Guruji, like, are what they are, and but it's like what that actually translates to a full theory is something very interesting, and what that actually means for interpretations of this randomness and for entanglement is also very interesting,
because that's where I think it does start to point towards divinity. If you're saying, like, for example, entanglement theory says that you pin down one, you pin down the other, but it's not that one can affect the other in a sense, or like change the other. Let's say like this, But now I see Guruji is changing the other one.
Yeah, so this is even more mysterious.
That's my point. Right? This is actually a really powerful thing. It's like, okay, so he is aware of what's going on in a devotee's life in South Africa while he's sitting here in Germany.
Yeah.
And not only aware, but then he goes and does something about it. He'll do something in that person's immediate locality that affects their situation because of his knowledge of what's going on in that exact moment, right? Okay, I believe science has to explain these things at some point. And it's not just about Guruji. I'm saying there are divine beings outside of Guruji, just so that, people sometimes think that I only believe this about Guruji. I don't. I believe this is true of most divine personalities and saintly beings, right? But this kind of thing shouldn't be dismissed, because it's one thing to read about it in a book. I remember, what was the argument? It was about Christianity. And there was a debate between atheists and Christians about the virgin birth, right? And I believe it was Christopher Hitchens at the time who said the most obvious counter-argument to it, which was, what's more likely? That one teenage girl in the Middle East violated and broke all the laws of nature to give birth to a son without any form of impregnation, or that a teenage girl in the Middle East lied about not being a virgin, right? And he just said, what's more likely, right? And it's a very simple rebuttal that sort of ends the topic for a lot of people, right? My point is more, if you start to have a series, hundreds, thousands, across time, across personalities of experiences of people doing this kind of thing, affecting others beyond their locality and whatever else, you need at least a theory. And you cannot come to me and say, oh, it's just, hallucination, or it's wishful thinking, or it's this, that, and the other. And I am yet to hear any kind of compelling theory that would even begin to explain this type of thing. And what I often see too much is dismissal. It's just dismissal, not even engaging with it, not even trying to explain it, just dismissing it as this 100%. Is nonsense, this is, quack stuff. And I feel like, I hope that it is in the field of entanglement, or is in the field of quantum theory, that eventually some sort of answers start to come. I'm not sure they will, because I think there are inherent limitations that we'll maybe touch upon a little later. But yeah, okay. I don't want to sort of, again, go too much off on tangents.
No, but that's a really good point. I think that's the struggle, and I was looking into it myself, and I'm like, it's I'm not able to right now, at the current state of the theory, able to figure out how I can bring it in a very concrete and conclusive way.
Right.
But,
let's see what the future holds.
Yeah, there may be, I'm not a genius, there may be another genius some years later who comes about.
It always feels like that we need a genius to just generationally come and just move the needle forward.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there something in the field of quantum that we could speak of in terms of when we understand creation or the creation process in Hinduism and in Vedic literature, we talk about a process. It's a process of, let's say, gradual expansion from points of potentiality, I would say. Is there some kind of equivalence there that we can speak of in terms of potentiality, almost looking at reality as a blueprint that then manifests? Is there something like that?
Actually, that's very interesting because it's amazing that the Puranas describe that, because it's such a parallel to the Big Bang, right? Because the Big Bang, there's the potentiality that there's the point of in the Big Bang theory specifically. I'm not talking about other theories at the moment. There are other theories, and that may be more aligned or more credible in the future. I don't know. But just the Big Bang, it says that there's this point of potentiality. There's a singular point upon which now this starts to, from this light, from a really small length scale, Planck mass, and Planck time, you start to have an emergence of matter. You start to have an emergence of matter and of electrons and other things, and gluons and other things, as we start to then, as space-time expands, it starts to slowly start to form atoms, and eventually over many, many thousands and millions of years to start to form clumps of matter, which then starts to condense into galaxies, which then starts to condense into star systems, and and there's supernova, and there's the first, second, third generation of stars that undergo supernova and destruction, and from into a nebulae turns into stars turns into star systems, and eventually we come about to now. So our solar system. Here we are. 13.8 billion years, roughly, according to our best model of cosmology right now, which is the lambda CDM model. And it says, okay, 13.8 billion later, here, two of us are sitting here. So that's sort of where it's coming. This is amazing, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of parallels in that cosmology, because if you think of the cosmology pointed at in the Puranas, as you said, the time frame seems to be similar, at least in a similar ballpark, right? Yeah. When we talk about the yugas and we calculate their spans, I mean, it goes into the billions, if not trillions of years. But also this idea of how Shrishti and Pralaya happen. So the idea of how reality becomes projected and then dissolves. It very much is described, as I said, in the Vedic literature as being, it starts from a point of transcendent potentiality. So it's like there seems to be a division between the spiritual world and the material world in Vedic literature, right? But from the spiritual world, just beyond time and space, hence the idea of transcendence, there is almost like a condensation of the material principles of reality that then, as I said, they act as a non-manifest blueprint for the then manifest house, right? Like you first get the architect to draw out the plans. Yeah. So everything exists in potentiality, and then it actually bursts out into reality in the process you described. I still find that to be one of the most compelling, like, let's say, alignments between a religious story of creation or a religious depiction of how reality comes about and the observable scientific, let's say, explanations.
Yeah,
even if they're just theories, right?
Absolutely. This is amazing because, it's really, I know Puranic timescales are a bit complicated, but in essence, it is exactly like you said. It's just the beginning of the universe was a few billion years ago. And right now we're finding from our current calculation and cosmological observations that it is also a few billion years ago. And, there's quite an immense parallel. In fact, there is a current theory that proposed by Roger Penrose, which is called conformal cyclic cosmology.
Yeah, right? This is fascinating. You were telling me about that.
Yeah. So it's basically says that you have our current universe, which sort of expands, and it continues to expand until the very end of its time, I suppose. And by that time, this is what Roger Penrose is saying, all the black holes have evaporated. And there must be some decay of massive particles like protons and other things, and it decays out. And all you're left with is a very simple structure of just photons. And because there's no massive particles, the notion of space-time the universe doesn't really know its own size because the universe doesn't know its own size, that's sort of a final condition of the Big Bang, which is superphotons. It looks very much like the initial conditions. Final condition of our universe looks very much like the initial conditions of a Big Bang, where there's just light and potentiality from which there's a creation that's emerging. So he calls it like one universe that goes from a point, expands out, and it ends, is also the beginning of another universe. And the end of that one is the beginning of another one. So there's infinite chain of cycles of cosmology. Now, it may appear like this is crazy. He called it an outrageous theory when he wrote the paper, because just before other people say it, but this is how science progresses. If you don't have anything that's really out there as a proposal, then you never progress, right? So, but this is amazing. This is an amazing proposal, because now this is actually also completely written in the Puranas, where in the Puranas, meaning these scriptures that are 5,000 years old, but the earliest manuscripts was, like I was saying, just many thousands of years ago was found. And these are already saying, like the rishis and sages who have that divine vision inside of them have seen it and written it down. There's 18 different Puranas, all 18 of them independently sort of are describing this cosmology, where it says that the universe expands, it dissolves, there's a dissolution, there's expansion, there's creation, and then there's a few billion years of dissolution. And after dissolution, there's another creation. And it's the same as if you look at the parallel. You have the creation, and then you have the dissolution, which is similar to how all the black holes would evaporate, and how all the protons would decay, and the things with matter would lose its properties and dissolve into fundamental photons, and so on.
Which, by the way, in the Puranic description, every creation of Prakriti would lose its features, in a sense, and dissolve back into just primordial Prakriti, like Prakriti being just the substance that then gives rise to all the various objects that material creation is composed of. And so, in a sense, the photons that you're describing would serve that purpose as such. It's like the ground elements, perhaps, like the very basic foundation that from then, But correct me if I'm wrong. For that, let's propose this idea of this cyclical sort of universe.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's dissolved and it's about to, and it goes back into its fundamental, basic pre-Big Bang condition. You mentioned light.
It's light, or when it says it's only photons remain, it'd be interesting to see if it's completely unmanifest or if it's photons.
Right.
That's still a catching point.
And correct me if I'm wrong. A disturbance happens.
Some disturbance happens, yes.
That it then gives rise to this projection manifestation in its gradual steps, as was in a sense mapped out.
Yeah.
And that disturbance, we don't know what it is.
Yes.
What causes rather that disturbance, right? So there is, in a sense, a gap for causation to this process. The process may be theorized and may be predicted, like either in Roger Penrose's cyclical theory or in a linear one, where it just happened the one time and it will cease to exist perhaps, and then all reality ceases to be as we understand it. Let's say that that's also a viable option. Doesn't matter. Nonetheless, there isn't a clear theory or a compelling theory on the causation, on what kicks off this process.
Agreed,
in some sense,
100%. Yeah.
right? Obviously, I know it's the lowest of low-hanging fruits. All religious people will say, well, of course, it's God. God is the mover. And I know that it's low-hanging fruit. That doesn't make it less credible, though. It is an explanation at the very least, that there is a intelligent being or will that causes this or kicks off this process. However, one thing I like about the Vedic sort of depiction of this is that they actually say that there is no real beginning to the universe, that Prakriti itself, material nature, is beginningless. It's one of the features of it. So, which would, in a sense, satisfy this idea of an endless cycle of creations. And so someone may ask the question, but when did it begin? And the Puranic literature essentially says this is a false question. It's a fallacious question, because you're talking about the beginning of something because we operate within time parameters, let's say. As temporal beings, we operate within these parameters, and therefore we ask this type of question, beginning, end. Whereas they're talking about cycles that have no beginning or end to its let's say, existence, right? I mean, God is described as being existence itself.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a little complex, but again, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting conversation because now you can even say that according to Puranas, time is not a fundamental thing. It's a projected thing.
Right.
So, like, when we say space-time is fundamental, it's already being sure, like, it's already written that it's not really that fundamental.
It's not. Absolutely. No, absolutely.
It's kind of an amazing parallel,
I actually think it's if we were to go down further down that road, it's one of the most essential understandings or presuppositions for then understanding how consciousness may operate. Not that we can pin it down, that is a complex subject, but the idea of why we believe divine beings or yogis or whoever can start to have what we would call powers over matter or to know things from past or future or whatever it may be is fundamentally because the premise or the claim is that consciousness, which is the conduit for this knowledge, this apprehension, or this whatever it is an immaterial thing. It's nothing to do with this material world, and it actually exists as an attribute beyond time and space, and therefore not confined by it.
Yeah,
right. But I would like to still explore that maybe a little later.
Yeah.
Before we get there, you did mention Roger Penrose, and you were explaining to me before we had this conversation here about Roger Penrose's three-world theory. Would you like to just touch upon that a little bit? Because I think it's a nice, how would I call it? A mystery of sorts, a fascinating, let's say, take on reality. What does he say about these three-world theory?
It's beautiful how he put it because it's kind of a nice explanation to kind of put things together for where we stand right now in our understanding of physics. So physics and our mind and other things. So the three worlds are as follows. There's the mental world, i.e. my consciousness and my conscious experiences. There's the physical world, which we know to be kind of an objective thing that we can observe and relate to on a common basis. Like you and I as mental constructs are observing as mental, we each our own consciousness are observing kind of the same physical world,
Yeah.
So there's the physical world. Then there's the Platonic or mathematical world, where these mathematical ideas are profound and so many different types of mathematical connections. And now here's how he describes it, is where you have the mathematical world, which is contained of so many different types of group theories and other theories and other relationships between numbers and symmetries of sorts, to use a very specific language. A subset of it is quite well describing the material world. So a subset of mathematical theories seems to be the basis for quantum field theory. And it seems to be describing this world in a remarkable accuracy, parts of this world in a remarkable accuracy. And now, this part of this physical world is cognized by us as human beings, not all of it.
Conscious beings, right?
As conscious beings. Like, we don't know the edge of the observable universe, for example, because the light that's far away has never reached us, so we don't know how big the universe is. So I can only say a part of it is cognized by us. And in fact, now, from our mind, we can still understand and relate to this abstract mathematical world that is now being used to describe a physical reality. So this is the interconnectedness between the three, where you have the mental, you have the Platonic, and then the physical reality, mathematical, physical, and mental reality, and how they kind of relate to each other in this way. And this is a mystery, because it's amazing that a conscious being is able to cognize this idealistic world of mathematics. And it's amazing that this idealistic world of mathematics is described a physical reality, So that's sort of the relationship.
Let's try to sort of map that out for again, the layman. What we're saying is that the mathematical world, the Platonic world, as you said, is not... Well, it's not a physical thing, neither is it invented by human beings. It seems to be a set of, in a sense, has its own rules and laws and whatever else, and it seems to very accurately describe the physical reality, right? Or at least to a large extent. And that abstract world of maths that explains this empirical physical world of matter, which we are present in, can be apprehended by the consciousness present in these physical beings that are us, that then sort of form this triangular explanation of sorts, because our experience as conscious beings is informed by this material nature. Our consciousness understands or apprehends mathematics to some, ever-expanding level, and that mathematics seems to explain the material world to some ever-expanding level as well. And it's all just very interwoven and intricate and mysterious and
mysterious,
sort of, right.
And he points to this idea that this mystery maybe can describe some intelligence, but he doesn't really take a step further than that. But
and I think we don't need to. I think often, again, the religious types are too quick to say, you see, intelligent design, fine-tuning, whatever it may be. I don't think we need to make those leaps. I think what we should do is almost point out the beauty, the mystery, and if eventually one wants to attribute this to God, great. And if you don't, great. But at least mystery is a great sort of humble position. I think that I don't know is something that most people are not comfortable enough with on both sides of the fence. I think if we all just become a little more comfortable with it, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it could be this, could be that. I think we naturally start to have more pathways to dialogue between these worlds. Right?
Yeah, instead of debates, it'll be like a discussion to exploration sort of, and you can, one is open to the other, then you can actually move forward, because otherwise it's kind of a closed thing and you're just throwing things at each other. So
divisive.
It doesn't really go far.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's expand on that. So this idea of exploration, open sort of conversation where the two fields could potentially help each other. Consciousness as it relates to matter, consciousness in general. What is your current, let's say, depiction of the landscape of understanding of what consciousness is? Like, how would you want to characterize that right now, and how we potentially could find a use for the spiritual literature and the spiritual world to help address this topic? But what's consciousness in a sense? Like, what's the landscape?
Yeah. So in current theories of physics right now, there hasn't been, so like I said, remember what I said about the indeterminism in quantum mechanics, right? Now, to interpret that idea, or to, and also there's the idea that when I measure or interact with this quantum system, I basically disturb it and I make it into a classical system completely. So to put it this way, a particle behaves like a wave until I observe it, becomes a particle now all of a sudden.
Right, so the act of observing.
Act of observation, i.e. a measurement, like an interaction, like an environment. Particles from the environment start to interact with the particles in the system. And the particles, this interaction brings about the information eventually through a chain of atoms and molecules to my physical perception this thing has a specific position, momentum, right? So there's like about 15 different interpretations of quantum mechanics, where many of them bring about the role of consciousness as one of them, like Wigner-Newman interpretation is called, can bring about consciousness as an active agent in the measurement process. You breaking down this quantum indeterminism by an act of observation, and the fact that it reaches your consciousness is what actually causes the breakdown. And there's theories which say, no, that's not true. He himself refuted it later on, his own theory. So there really isn't any standing ground for consciousness right now in the sense of interpretations of quantum mechanics right now. That's where science is right now. And it's really hard to pin it down in physics, because what does that really mean? Because consciousness is only relevant to me as a material body. So is it an emergent property? So i.e., is it because all of my atoms and molecules come together and they form this complex biological process, which is leading to a feature called consciousness? This is the atheistic kind of theory where consciousness is not fundamental, but it's emergent. Or is consciousness a very fundamental aspect of our universe? And it has an interaction on the quantum system in ways that we probably haven't found yet, and that that it could lead to a more deeper, a more solid theory in physics later on. I'm more on the second side.
Yeah. I would hope so.
So
it's a fundamental principle, right?
Yeah.
I think this is always something that blows people's minds, though, this idea that the act of observation or consciousness, in a sense, expanding itself to meet something can alter that thing or can affect the state of that thing. I mean, at least that's how it's often depicted. I think from the Vedic perspective, and I think it's important to point this out, the problem is the use of the word consciousness often. So you just described earlier that we're sentient beings. Like, so when we were talking about Roger Penrose's three-world theory, we talk about us as being conscious, sentient beings.
Yeah.
But the way the word is used, often in layman's terms, is just to mean that we have what I call a mind, a consciousness, something that thinks, apprehends, etc., etc. We look at that from the Vedic perspective as consciousness is the essence of your being, because it's the soul. There's the soul body dichotomy, right? So you have the mind body complex, and you have the soul as a deeper layer of your being, right? In a sense, the mind body is the emergent principle, in a sense, whereas the foundational is the soul.
Yeah.
And the soul has consciousness as its attribute, and the soul enlivens the inanimate mind-body complex, right? And so it's like a machine that is plugged in, and so it comes to life. And then the machine shows you intelligence or consciousness, right? We now, looking at machines, would say, my phone is not conscious, right? It is programmed, it is enlivened by a series of conscious beings who make it function in a particular way, right?
Yeah.
To one who wouldn't understand the mechanics of this, if you gave it to someone 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, they might believe this is a conscious entity because it starts to speak to them, Siri starts to speak to them, and whatever else, and they'll start to think, wow, this is a intelligent living being, right? Who knows what technology will be 1,000 years from now with AI and whatever else.
Yeah.
But the basic fundamental mechanics is that we believe whatever aspect of sentience that is displayed in the material world is enlivened by a spiritual principle, which is what we would actually call consciousness. And so chit, right? Versus, in a sense, mind, right? So the mind is only a vehicle for which this consciousness, this fundamental principle of reality, consciousness, manifests through, in a sense, like a lens of sorts, right? And the reason why our consciousness is as limited as it appears to be, right? We only see things that are here and is because, as I said, the body, the physical body, is a vessel for which consciousness manifests through, and therefore it manifests through the limitations of said body.
Yeah.
So consciousness in its bound state only sees what the physical eyes see, hears what the physical ears can hear. And so our consciousness is measured almost intrinsically in marriage with the inherent limitations of the physical body or the physical vessel that it operates from within. So it's like we measure consciousness by the capacity of ears, noses, physical bodies, eyes, etc. Whereas from the spiritual angle, what we're saying is that if you disentangle these two things, consciousness as the foundational principle and the material body as the vessel, then consciousness is free to roam unrestricted, in a sense. And so that's how you would transcend separations of space, time, because consciousness essentially is not bound by these things and can know whatever. It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's not a provable thing empirically.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, why I want to touch on this is because this is where I see the entry point of spirituality into this scientific exercise, right? There's the hard problem of consciousness, as it's famously depicted, right? And consciousness is something that every scientist that I've ever heard speaks of in a very nebulous way.
Yeah.
You agree with this?
I agree with this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The spiritualist tends to, in my experience, be a little arrogant and come in and say, well, we know what it is. Yeah. And instead of saying, practice this, and that, and you will experience it for yourself, they try to explain it and define it and sort of use words to pin it down, which I don't believe it's going to work. It's not ever going to work. It's like telling somebody who never tasted an orange, I'm going to describe to you the taste of orange, and expect that you're now going to understand what that is.
Yeah.
It's an impossibility, right? Because I'm describing an experience. And unless you have a reference for that experience, unless you've experienced the same thing, it will always remain a complete abstraction.
Yeah.
You have no reference for it. right? What you felt in the presence of Guruji, what you felt chanting the Gayatri mantra, is something that you can talk about to somebody, and that will never do justice to what you've actually experienced.
100%.
Right? And I love what you said earlier, which is that spirituality is the inner journey, it's the inner science, almost like of experience. Yeah, and it cannot be denied. Yeah, but it's also very difficult to transmit it and communicate it in the same way that material scientific advancements are communicated, because they're communicated through experiments, formula, empirical evidence. It's just a more convenient vehicle of communication, because everyone can, in a sense, objectively observe the same things and come to the same conclusions.
Exactly.
In the spiritual realm, because we're talking about internal experiences, the only deficiency seems to be in our capability of communicating them effectively and objectively so that the other person can see exactly what it is that I'm experiencing. We try to in every facet of life. When a couple comes to each other and says, I love you, we just hope that we mean the same thing when we say I love you to each other. Like, my understanding of love may be different to yours.
Yeah.
My experience or your experience, but we hope that they match enough that we can make a successful partnership here. You know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that the spiritual dimension of it is you have gurus, realized spiritual beings who make claims about consciousness, about the nature of reality, about God, about love, and all sorts of things. And they'll say, this is not your conventional material understanding of these things. When I say love, Guruji says, I don't mean the love you understand. When I speak of consciousness, I don't speak of consciousness in the way that you're understanding it, right? Now, we may come back to him and say, then you're just talking nonsense. If there isn't anything that you can concretely pin it down to, what are you talking about? His answer would be, perform the experiment, which is the yoga, which is the sadhana, which is the whatever the spiritual process will be. And I don't want to restrict it only to Hinduism.
Yeah.
Whatever the process may be.
Any religion.
Any religion. If there is a process to transcendence, let's just say we follow that process. Okay. If you arrive at the same experience, if you arrive at this transcendent experience, you will have understood what I am unable to communicate with the limitation of words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you started this story today by talking to me about lack of feeling of fulfillment. And then I asked you feel fulfilled now? And you said 100%.
Yeah.
Right? Explain that scientifically. You may be able to, but I believe the terminology fails us.
I agree.
The methods of communication fail us, right? So all you say is, I feel. Feeling. We incur feelings to explain, right? Most people simply can't understand what that looks like, what that feels like, what that is, because it's your feeling. Yeah. I understand you because I believe I have similar feelings, but I don't know for sure. You don't know for sure. Like we have a similar sort of experience, right?
Yeah.
And I think this starts to go into the realm of phenomenology, this idea of how can we maybe create a sort of common field of objective experiences from the subjective realm that each person operates from.
Yeah.
And I feel like if the scientific world would be more open to, as we said earlier, dialogue, converse, not fight, not debate, not whatever, but just sort of explore. I want to know everything you have to teach me about this world.
Yeah.
And yet here are some undeniable displays of something that you can't explain.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's sit down and have a conversation without preconceived notions and judgments. How far away do you think that is from being a reality?
That's interesting. There's this idea that there's two things that needs to happen. One is the willingness. The people have to have the willingness to have that dialogue and start to bridge that gap, because then there'll be some progress. And basically that, so for example, in our case, the Vedanta can guide the science into the right direction rather than having many, many different types of theory. Because like I said before, the mathematics is so huge. You could literally come up with anything. And you look at string theory, there's like, it's really hard to pin it down to an experimental result just because of its, just because of the way it works. No, I can't pin it down exactly because I don't know the theory super well, but it's said that there's like 10 to the 500 possibilities for this universe, and you have to kind of choose it in a way that forms this specific universe in some way. So, but if you start to now marry the personal experiences, the Vedanta, the Shastras, the scriptures, and other things that have a concrete basis, and also the experiences of the masters, including Paramahamsa Vishwananda, Guruji, then you can start to kind of nudge science in the right direction, and sort of then you can go into a situation where science is complementing the spiritual life. Yeah. Whereas right now it stays a bit blind.
I fully agree.
It stays a bit blind, and it doesn't really know where to go from here. And we're still looking for experimental evidences of many things,
Guruji asked you to speak about spirituality in the science world, or about science in the spiritual world?
Told me to speak about God in the scientific field in a language they can understand.
In a language they can understand. How's that been?
Oh, that's been an interesting journey, because the only language I have been able to speak to is from the language of the heart. Because that's something everybody can relate to, whether you're a scientist or not a scientist. When everybody feels, everybody knows about love, everybody wants to love and be loved. That's a universal language. That's the language I can speak to them about. Any other language falls short, because you can always debate one way or another. It becomes a very heavy mental game.
Seems like a difficult instruction. In a sense, to fulfill.
Yeah, so that's where I'm starting. Start with the Vedanta, start with the quantum mechanics and understanding of indeterminism and quantum mechanics, and where you can go from there and start to kind of nudge the two to come together. Because along with that instruction, we also were speaking with, I was with him and Swami Parantapa. Mm-hmm. He was also, I think, on your podcast earlier. So, as I started to speak about this, and it's like, in ancient India, the scientists came up with the science. Like, for example, Bhaskaracharya in 1080 or so, came up with a really detailed description of the cosmos, and we were able to calculate the trajectory of the planets using a very early form of calculus. But this was 1000 AD. This was way, way, way before Newton even understood, or before Newton or Leibniz. So these discoveries are there. It's called the Siddhanta Shiromani and Surya Siddhanta. They describe in great detail how the cosmological things evolve. They include the form of geometrical geometry that describes and can calculate the position of the planets when they'll arrive in a specific way, and it was to be used for astrological predictions later on. But nonetheless, the astronomy has been greatly delved deeply into this. But this was always married to a spiritual pursuit. This is always married to a spiritual life where one is leading to go deeper inwards and to kind of raise one's consciousness to experience God and to experience Bhakti, experience the love of God and the relationship with Him,
Yeah. No. I think that there is something to be learned from that. Like, we really have to find a healthy way to marry the two, because otherwise both are worse in their own individual endeavors without the other.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the challenges that the scientific world has had, and I fully understand with the religious world, is that there are a lot of religions in this world. Not all of them are as accommodating to science as the other. And some of them have beliefs that are unscientific to some extent, right? Not so much about cosmology and the beginning of the world and all of this, but even about sort of the ethics and benefits to certain types of behaviors and certain things that in the end can be easily refuted by science. And if religious systems don't have flexibility to either reinterpret or discard certain beliefs or customs that are not compatible with science, right, and that are non-fundamental, you start to really create difficulty, because it's this dogmatic sort of mentality that puts people off. You mentioned earlier, New Age spiritualists talking about quantum this, quantum that, entanglement. It puts off scientists because they're like, you don't know what you're talking about, and you bring it across in a very simplistic way, and it's just I think the same thing is true when religious people speak about their beliefs in a dogmatic way that is not, they're not open to have it be tested, or they're not open to have it be discussed even. It puts off the scientific mind, because the scientific mind says, well, we should be able to discuss and explore and evaluate and assess and whatever else. And if we can't, I really believe we're worse for it, right? I think most good things come from deliberation, from exploration. The rishis who revealed many of the shastras that we now venerate did so upon spiritual exploration, did so because they were explorers, they were seekers that found these things, revealed in a sense their findings with the world. And so I come back to the Isha Upanishad verse that says that, you know, the mysteries of reality will be only revealed to one who has knowledge both of the material and the spiritual. And I think it'd be wonderful if people start getting a little closer together.
That would be super wonderful, and I think it would complement each other quite well. I think shouldn't be in a situation where you have to fight about these things, you know.
Have you ever had, it just came to my mind, have you ever had a conversation with any of your colleagues, either studying or work or whatever, that sort of went towards spiritual directions that you felt were there was some openness from their side, or what's been your experience?
My supervisor in PhD was sort of raised a Hindu, so he was not completely against these things, but it's the same kind of light where you don't have to try to marry two things,
right?
When you don't fully have the language to do so. You can just focus on the thing that's interesting and exciting.
Are most people in your field of work atheists or believers?
I asked them once, actually. They're kind of some are atheists, some are agnostic, I think, and some really don't really have much to do with it, because the work itself, for example, in experimental physics, you're in the deep end of fixing things, of instrumentation, of data analysis, and of things breaking in your experiment, of things you have to fix in your experiment, the things you need to upgrade. And you're really in the deep of the not just the physics, that you're doing the physics analysis, applying the physics to get the results, but you're also doing a lot of engineering work and all this. So, and when you look at the physics, you're trying to measure it in a very specific way to try to understand and to really pin it down with full accuracy, making sure that you're not missing any other effects that the physical world could have on your system. So they're called systematic uncertainties. So you're trying to characterize, you get good statistics by making your experiment really work, and you're getting good systematics to make sure you understand every effect that's happening on the system. And eventually you get to a number, which then you can compare with other numbers in an objective way. That's sort of the focus, and
right.
But some people do say they don't believe in God, and some people say they're not sure. They were Christian, now they're not. That's sort of where it stands right now.
Right.
And
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Well, look, I hope that there's some major observation that comes, some major breakthrough from your work. I often find when Guruji empowers somebody to do something, or really encourages them to do something, there's always some hidden gem to come from it. There's some benefit, who knows when, how, but it's really nice. And I think you're the kind of person that it's really easy to imagine a follow-up podcast with, because there's just so much to be discussed.
So much to uncover, yeah.
So many things that we didn't really go into, and we could. So this was a pleasure. Thank you. I think it was enlightening for a lot of people to just sort of hear this perspective. A rare, I would say, perspective in the devotional world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to share this, and happy to have a go at explaining these things and kind of looking at the subtleties of both the worlds.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you so much, Swami.
Jai Gurudev Maharaj. Thanks so much.